Right, I'll start with the introductions. Some of you may have seen Paul Gowans before from VIAVI Solutions. He did a fantastic presentation yesterday. Paul has more than 25 years experience in the communications and wireless industries. He's currently responsible for 5G and fiber go-to-market globally. Paul's expertise in IP, mobile, virtualization and analytics comes from developing and supporting marketing and the consulting on major mobile communications projects. So if you're welcome to the stage, please, Paul Gowans. Thank you. Next up, we have Jeremy Spencer, Director of Marketing and Communications from BAI Communications. Jeremy leads all marketing and communications activity in the UK for BAI, taking to the market 5G neutral host, small cell and smart city infrastructure solutions. Jeremy helped to launch the UK's first 5G public network and leads 5G innovation for BT Enterprise. He also launched the UK's first 4G network and the EE brand into the large business market. So please welcome to the stage, Jeremy Spencer. Hi. Next up, we have Jessica Ellis, Director of Applied 5G at Deloitte. Jessica is a strategic business developer and creative thinker. She works across sectors in the digital infrastructure deployments and is solution-oriented to derive adoption of 5G and develop sustainable innovation in business operations. She focuses on joined-up strategies and collaborative approaches to programs and projects. So welcome to the stage, please, Jessica. And last but not least, we have Amir Abdelazim, expert partner at Detecon International. Amir was previously CTIO at Asia Cell Communications in Iraq, and after earlier roles including CTIO of Airtel Tigo in Ghana, CTIO of Millicom in Ghana, CTIO of Millicom Rwanda, Strategic Quality Director at Millicom, and positions with Nokia Siemens Networks, Etisalat, Alcatel, and Orange. Wow, that's a lot of experience. So welcome to the stage, please, Amir. Okay, as normal, we'll have time, obviously, for a Q&A session at the end. So let's begin. Okay, so the first question is for Jeremy. So, Jeremy, what are some of the strongest examples of the benefits of widespread and accessible 5G service?
Super question, Alex. Thank you very much. It's a super question, isn't it? And it seems a very straightforward one as well. But I think it's one, I think, that if we're honest, the industry is actually still trying to get its hands around. I think, as you alluded earlier, we've had this week some fantastic use cases espoused. And Alex, Jessica, you've been involved in a lot of those tests and trials that Robert was talking about. But when we start to look at the public 5G macro network, and particularly consumers, I think it's still early days. And I think certainly when I was involved in launching that first UK network, it was more about providing more capacity on the network. So it was more about providing consumers a more reliable, faster, more capacity service on a 4G network where you get areas of congestion. But I think probably people have espoused 5G as the generation for business. And I think it's probably business we need to look to where those earlier benefits are going to start to come from. And I remember back in the days, and maybe fibre broadband is a good proxy for what's going to happen. Because I remember being in an ISP when fibre broadband first came along, and everyone goes, why do I need these 300 gigabit type speed services when I've got 30 megabits and I can do high definition video at home? But then I think now we all think that's the benchmark, because anyone who's been in a household where you're trying to do video conferencing at home, and maybe your partner's doing video conferencing at home, and the kids are gaming, etc., you need that capacity. And I think this is what's going to start to happen with 5G. And I think the use case that Robert mentioned in just the previous session with the connected ambulance is a great example where there's business applications that need to run multiple streams of data simultaneously. So in that ambulance example, we were doing a remote ultrasound connection between the paramedic and the clinician. We had high definition video running simultaneously. There was a video call running simultaneously with a haptic glove control, etc. And whilst, in theory, those things can run over a 4G connection, what we found when we tried to do it over 4G is the video reduced from high definition to standard definition. So what you see, whilst you can do those things on 4G, in 5G they're better. And we started to see things, I think what's starting to get traction already is the connected field worker. There are many people that need to work out in the field in complex tasks, maintaining all sorts of things. And the world of augmented reality, being able to serve those workers with rich media so they can be informed and do tasks without interruption, without downtime, when they're in the middle of a task, working hands-free with all the emergence of smart wearable technology that's coming, I think is another nod to that need for 5G. And there's also the fixed substitution world, I think, as well, where rapid site type connectivity, construction is a great example where you need to get connectivity in ahead of the lead time that you get with fixed, providing resilience. Fixed wireless access is obviously a big thing in the US, less so here in the UK, but there are still pockets, I think, where fixed wireless access is a potential as well. And I think we've got to remember as well, we're still in the early days of 5G. There's a long journey to go. We're still on that standalone technologies. And I think as we start to move to standalone, and particularly for business who really would benefit from a faster uplink capability, so you can start to do things like high definition CCTV, backhauling, the low latency. There's going to be all the rafts of use cases we've been hearing about will start to come, and we can see that, can't we, because of private networks where those capabilities are starting to emerge faster. And then we'll get into the whole world of autonomous transport, which is, some of those trials are starting to percolate, and we've been involved with Sunderland City Council, where there's a big one up in the northeast with the Nissan supply chain doing autonomous transport in the supply chain. And there's, I think, a new round coming where we're looking at autonomous buses, which will be an exciting development. So lots to look forward to.
Whole world of possibilities, quite literally. And just for Amir, this next one, just in regards to 5G security, how can this be used to ensure the privacy of data is being transferred through open 5G networks?
Thanks for the question. So first I would say that the evolution of the communication over the generation was more towards human needs. So we moved from actually communication, video communication, and streaming, entertainment, mostly, and video conferences still actually for persons. The 5G is the first technology that we are starting to actually make it predominantly also to include machines. And then having a machine that is definitely having simply more capability than the human eye for the watching of a video or the human capability of listening. So you're bringing machines with sensors and you're giving them much powerful networks that they need to evolve. So now you have a machine that is coming into the ecosystem and that is actually individualized on a private network on an ecosystem that is existing. And this machine, like the ambulance, is walking in the street and hacked. Not gonna end nicely. So lucky and unlucky enough, over the last 2 years, we have been stress tested for technology, for security, when everyone has to work from home, and then all corporate companies will have to actually enable their workers to start working from remotely. So a lot of big base start to happen on the security for remote work. And that actually started to adopting new policies around zero tolerance access, or actually how to enable your team to connect while keeping your security on the same time. That was a good actually stress test for the industry that needs to be completely upgraded. And thinking about many of the use cases of the 5G, it could have been done by the Wi-Fi. But one of the main problems of the Wi-Fi, again, it's individualized. When you go into the 5G, your main strength, who's going with a big player, is that you start having what we call centralized element management. You manage your nodes on the end centrally. And that gives a big edge for the second level of security. Private networks definitely have their own responsibility as well on doing this, and we'll have to talk about standard things of actually security, culture, education, and the protocols around it. But then we need to change our way of operation as well. So if you speak about security operating center, that has been massively been rolled out in most of the advanced markets over the last 5-10 years. Now that security operating center has 80% of its work nowadays on the traditional network coming from incident management. I'm responding to an incident, or I'm actually operating on a system that is responding to an incident. With the 5G, it's a completely different new game. So that work has to go into maybe 25% of your capacity, and then everything else has to move into analytics, predictives, digital forensics, and you need to be ready to actually expect the attack before it happens, and then do the culture around this. So it's a whole new game for controlling the security on the 5G. Steps are being done, but it's not ready yet.
Thank you, Amir. Just in regards, Jessica, linking to security, cybersecurity, and beyond, what kind of things are needed in terms of the 5G infrastructure, in terms of investment? Like, where's a good starting point in terms of where we begin with this, and what kind of things do we need to be considering?
Do you mean in relation to kind of building the business case to invest in 5G?
Well, I think yeah, certainly. I mean, firstly, linking to security in terms of like what kind of investments do we need in with that, and then beyond that, in terms of just as a starting point, infrastructure-wise, how do you approach it from Deloitte's perspective?
Well, it's quite complicated in its own right, because I think a single business case for investing in 5G is sort of not the panacea. And we've already talked about multiple use cases, which at the present time, sort of individually, and my previous work at DCMS in the 5G testbeds and trials program has proved out the technology works across lots of different use cases and applications and services. But to build the business case for widespread and scaled investment into 5G, either in a private network or in the commercial network, those use cases got to start being stacked. And I think you use the example of, the connected ambulance. You were stacking the use cases until the point you broke 4G. So then you can start to quantify and build out a business case to need, if you're going to scale out that kind of technology, that you do need 5G. And I think, everybody is, sort of mentioned we're a long way off. I think the maturity of the conversation has definitely moved on. I'm definitely starting to see in the market from enterprise customers and private networks that there is a much stronger appetite to bring in some of the use cases, the IoT sensors, the technology, the data and AI platforms and engines, and of course the security of all of that is paramount. But again, it's about stacking those use cases, bringing in multiple partnerships and collaborators to kind of deliver a solution end-to-end, sort of through the value chain, and then start to incrementally build out that business case. And I think we will see more scaled investment and scaled adoption of some of these technologies. But a lot of what was happening in DCMS, and I think Robert will support me with West Midlands 5G, fantastic technology trials and proving it out, but they're actually not big scale. They are small scale, and this next stage is really about kind of incrementally scaling them out, finding some brave private sector and hopefully some public sector partnerships to co-invest, share the risk, and see how we can bring some of this stuff to market.
Yeah, I mean, we had Tara McDade from Salesforce speaking earlier about the monetization of 5G, and from the Salesforce perspective, and obviously having the software to see API-driven or cloud-based sort of software. Yeah, I mean, that's obviously a huge question in terms of the monetization of this. I mean, would any of you like to sort of answer on that sort of angle in terms of people really thinking like, when do I invest in this? Is now a good time, or is it still in too much of a sort of a developmental stage to really kind of push your chips into it too much?
I think from the operator's perspective, 5G has been a really interesting challenge. That's certainly in the enterprise dynamic of how can you take a slice of that extra value that's going to be created, because you do the underlying infrastructure, but then it's all the devices, it's all the software, etc., that provides the end solution that requires other partners to come in but what's the role and what value can you take and justify in that value stack to help you invest and improve the business case to continue the underlying and the rollout of that infrastructure. And the way you develop those use cases in the early days, I think from what Test and Trials has shown us, is you have to co-create those solutions with the customer. No one here can just suddenly think, oh, let's go create that product and then take it to market as you do traditionally with a mature technology. You've got to go like Robert, we did with university hospitals and sit down with them and understand their problems. They think, oh, 5G could potentially help us, but we don't know how. So, it's a meeting of minds to say, oh, maybe we could do that, maybe we could do that, maybe we could do. Then you land on, maybe there's a problem with accident and emergency admissions. How can we improve triage out in the field with paramedics? Or what's the most important diagnostic? It's ultrasound. Okay, who can do a portable ultrasound system? How can we connect that to fire? And you start to build it together. And then the challenge, as you say, then is the scale. And then that's the challenge for an operator to go, oh, we don't normally do ultrasound systems. How are we going to do that? And they've got to go and build that ecosystem of partners. And equally, the partners have to sort of get on board and see. So we're in that kind of, how is it all going to come together and who's going to take what slice of the pie? So it's working through all of that at the moment, which I think is that very interesting dynamic playing out.
Jessica, you want to say?
Just to add to that, and I think you described it really well. It's about how do the different partnerships in the organisations build out their white space, so they can go and individually sell their products and services whilst also delivering an end-to-end solution. The other thing I think that needs to be considered is that this is, even though it's operational transformation in enterprise or public services, where ordinarily with software-based solutions you might have seen a much more immediate return, this software and hardware play with 5G use cases and all of the technology that's going to be brought around, it's going to need to have a view of a much longer term return. And that's the other thing that I think that enterprise customers, public sector, are going to have to get their heads around, is that they're going to have to put the investment in now, but the return and in actual transformation and seeing those numbers come down or efficiencies gained, it's going to take longer than traditional software-only solutions that we've seen in the past with the internet and other solutions in that space.
It's a really good point. Amir, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think as well we are talking about more advanced markets. I think if we start talking about the development markets, the opportunity is completely different for the 5G business case. Because the markets are behind when it comes to fix-it. The market behind when it comes to fiber infrastructure, rural connectivity. Actually, it's a good acceleration to the economy. And we have seen different studies that done over the last couple of years in different African markets or even Middle East, where you're able to think that the increasing of the efficiency of the use of your spectrum happens properly when you go into the 5G. And that would be used to replace the existing lack of infrastructure. I think the development markets needs to be looked at in a different way, because there is a business case there. It can work. And it can deliver beyond the whole ecosystem of automation. So still basic features, basic services with a mega requirements of data volumes. It can only be hosted over 5G. Instead of going to every apartment with your fiber, go to the 5G site and then get your community connected. And that would actually add a big different value to the development markets.
Thank you. We will get to you, Paul, I do promise. You've got a couple of juicy ones coming up. Don't you worry about that.
Back to back.
Jeremy, just in regards to who is responsible for ensuring access to dependable and affordable 5G services? And this is obviously open floor for all of you afterwards.
Thanks. Well, I think the answer to that is it's no one person or no one body. I think it's a number of organisations that need to come together. I think there's a role clearly for central government, and we've seen the role that DCMS have played here in the UK, encouraging the adoption of use cases, improving the technology. Obviously, government's very involved in spectrum as well, and the policies that help shape the industry through that. Local government, as we heard from Robert, has a tremendous role to play, both through improving planning and also access to assets as well, which is very important when we think of densification of the network. We can talk about separately. There's the MNOs, the mobile network operators, of course, And I think there's another interesting dynamic that's starting to come through as well in terms of retrofitting 5G in the developed world, as Robert alluded to, is very expensive. The civil works involved, not just putting the extra fibre capacity for the backhaul, but the new radios that you've got to deploy, they're big beasts. So the sites have got to, have more reinforced concrete and the masts, etc. It's a big old job and it's expensive. And as we're hearing, the use case is still, fluid. And I think that's forcing the MNOs to really think about looking at ways to share the cost of that infrastructure in a way that they haven't had to think about before. And we're seeing the ecosystem, whereas the MNOs have always been really keen to own everything, from the customer and the service to the customer and the products that they provide and taking to market, all the way into owning the infrastructure, deploying the infrastructure, etc. I think that model is starting to break down now, and we're starting to see new players on the block, people like BAI, neutral host providers, coming in to say, actually, we can invest and we can take on some of that cost and help you get coverage where you would struggle to get to in your normal rollout. So we're starting to see other players come in to help accelerate the rollout and share the cost of the infrastructure. And we're also starting to see potential new models where local government, and there's a great example, wasn't there, test and trials program of Chelsea up in Liverpool, wanting to create a small cells network as a way to provide services, in social care services in particular, as a low-cost way. And we're also involved in the Smart City 5G small cell rollout as well in Sunderland, where it's a slightly different model where we are co-investing with the council to create a very dense 5G network to do those sorts of community-based type services, public services, that isn't at the forefront of a traditional MNO rollout. So we're starting to see different models emerge where public sector and the public purse start to co-invest with the private, and you get that great synergy of public-private going on. So I think 5G has forced all sorts of changes into the industry, which is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And Paul, how likely is it that Europe's going to meet its target of 5G connectivity by 2030? I just realised
it depends, right, is always the answer to these things. In terms of, I guess there were two goals I think they had set for 2030. One was to get fibre connectivity, to homes, and the other one was to generally have 5G across populated areas, right? Populated areas. And I guess there's a lot of nuance to that. Is it indoor and outdoor, right? Is it both? What bandwidth are you providing? What speed are you providing? Is it every house, right? I mean, so I'm from Edinburgh. It has 5G service up there. We do have mobile connectivity north of the border. And actually, it's not bad, but it's spotty, right? 200 meters from my home, you can get really great 5G. I sit in my home office at home in my garden, and it goes down to 3G, right? So I'm indoors. And I'm thinking, 3G, it's 2022, right? Come on. And a lot of operators are now thinking, actually, we're going to turn off 3G. Yeah. And 4G, 5G, will keep 2G probably for a lot of IoT stuff. So there's an old nuance to that. Is the cottage on the Isle of Lewis going to get 5G connection? Does it need it? And then I think, well, actually, do I need it at home? Because I can do calling and data services all on my phone through Wi-Fi. So is 5G connectivity important for me? So there's a lot of kind of nuance elements to that. I think it's right to have a kind of goal for that and set a bar and a calendar timeline. Maybe it gets to 90% or something by then, and that's good enough, So I think you have to kind of, going back to some of the questions about verticals, which is connecting all homes with 5G the important aspect, or are there other areas of 5G that perhaps should get more priority, and more focus around some of the verticals and ecosystems that we might want to support. So it depends.
Yeah. All right. Just as so if you are in a situation where I don't know, maybe you can only get 3G or 4G, and you're actually genuinely worried about like when they do switch it off, because you're like, how is that sort of handled in terms of like when people switch that off? Do they have, do the mobile phone providers, if they identify that there are certain little spotty areas where that it doesn't exist, have they then got a responsibility to? Well, how do they handle that, or do just other networks then swallow up those customers?
Yeah, well, actually, it's a good question, and the whole RAN optimization element, I touched on this a little bit yesterday, is a non-trivial problem, because you can do quite detailed analytics on who's doing what where, with what technology. So who's using 2G, 3G, 4G, what services are they running, where are they? What base stations are getting covered. So you can actually do some quite detailed predictive analytics on, if I turn off 3G here and I have to boost power in 4G over here, is my coverage still going to remain? So a lot of operators do quite complex kind of planning around that area, so that obviously if they turn off a mobile service, it's not going to ruin a whole cell site.
I have a point on cell sites, and I understand from working with some of the people like Vodafone, T-Mobile, the cell site sort of auctions, and it's very competitive, and looking at what T-Mobile have done with their 5G services and how successful that's been. But it does seem like quite a complex sort of process. I mean, I guess, what are the sort of differences between the US market and the UK market in that regard to sort of bidding for this bandwidth and the spectrum and that kind of thing?
Honestly, not a great deal. I mean, there's variations in terms of what kind of spectrum gets used from country to country, but the FCC goes through a similar kind of process that goes through in kind of UK and Europe, in terms of making spectrum available. There's interesting things come up recently. We operate test and measurement in avionics and on 5G, and you might have seen some challenges coming up, for example, on I don't want 5G at the airport because it's going to potentially affect older altimeter equipment that was in planes, etc. So that's come up. That's not come up as much in the EU. There's some, again, variations in the market. So the whole kind of spectrum, usage and capability and availability, it's not really that different, apart from which kind of chunks get made available. And when they get released. So the whole at the end of the day, and we were talking about this earlier on, it's a finite resource, right? People need to understand that, right? With fibre in the ground, fibre to people's homes, it's kind of infinite, right? You can just put more fibres in, right, and just keep doing that. With spectrum, it's not infinite, it's finite, So that's why the whole, how does it get used and how does it get applied? Which industry does get used? I think it was SpaceXK were worried about the spectrum that, I can't remember which operator, was it Dish, were wanting to use because they were worried it was going to knock out their satellites, So that's why there's a lot of interest over spectrum, because it's a finite resource, and therefore has to get used as efficiently as possible.
Just moving on to the sustainability challenges, Jessica, what kind of challenges are there for the rollout of 5G when it comes to sustainability, from the infrastructure, but also things like, for example, this is a slightly different angle, but reusing smartphones, this kind of thing, because obviously there's millions of them being developed, and there are some innovative companies that are able to bring back from the dead old phones and stuff, and little things like that can be smart ways of making things a bit more sustainable. But from your perspective, what kind of things, what kind of initiatives are you seeing?
So I'll do the first bit. There was a GSMA report, I think, that came out earlier in the year, and I was reading it, and the majority of the carbon footprint and energy consumption from mobile networks is actually not from the mobile networks themselves. Even though we're trying to drive down power efficiency in the RAN, and there's a lot of focus on Open RAN being more power efficient, all of that, it actually comes from things like concrete on rooftops, digging up roads, and all of those kind of things, and their supply chain and logistics. So where we've discussed a lot of the use cases and applications that 5G will enable in logistics and tracking and tracing and supply chain efficiencies, that's where longer term the whole value chain of 5G will contribute, I think, towards net zero as we reduce transport, and we reduce emissions, and we, make sure that we're using autonomous vehicles, and all of those different amazing use cases that we've heard. Once they start to be scaled and adopted, then they will be contributing to net zero. On the reuse of phones, it is a major problem. And there are fairly aggressive campaigns out at the moment, actually, all around London Tube, about trying to reuse phones, and they're still exactly the same. But it kind of does beg the question of how many of us sit there at home with our old iPhone in the drawer, or whatever it is. I've got one, but I have tended to try to sell on the other ones and make some money.
See my phone, honestly.
Yeah, well,
I'm 7 years old.
But I mean, it is a real challenge, and I think it's going to be about education. It's going to be about education on the manufacturer's side, and their ability to software upgrade rather than need to replace handsets, and all of those very important facts. But yeah, that we need to do something about that, because not only with mobile phones, but with car batteries, with all of the other solutions that are out in the market to help us reach sustainability targets, but actually they contribute themselves heavily to the inability of reaching them. So I don't have an answer, but we should be doing more, and I think campaigning and education out in the consumer marketplace and along with the providers is key.
I think mobile technology, though, can have lots of indirect benefits, particularly enhancing public transport, I think is a very good one. Obviously, getting more people back onto public transport after COVID, I think, is a lofty goal. And certainly here in London, we're busily working on bringing mobile connectivity onto the underground after so many years, which hopefully will start to encourage people back into there. And Robert was talking about improving just public safety and giving people confidence from that perspective. So I think there's lots of things that having mobile connectivity can start to help encourage drives for sustainability in other ways.
Now, we are going to overrun a little bit, but it's fine because our event lasts till 4 anyway. So if you guys are all right to just for an extra few minutes. Just another question for Amir. Just in regards to, this is a bit of I don't know who wrote these questions, but it's quite open-ended. What is the vision for 5G and the future of 6G? I think 6G seems such a sort of intangible thing.
It's a perfect one for you.
And probably one of the worst questions to be asked, I'd imagine. So I do apologise, I didn't do it.
All right, it's okay. I would say it will need an event on its own to talk about it. But let me lead by, again, it's about what's the demand, right? So when we're talking about the 5G use cases, we are more starting to bring the machine on board. So the cycle of actually the 5G should bring more demand on data. So, and we hear about use cases that are immersive use cases. We talk about use cases that artificial intelligence. So the key word is that we are moving into massive mobility. So for this massive mobility to occur, we need to be able to connect to this. And you cannot have a handover drop or a coverage blackout on 100 kilometers per hour speeding car on a highway. So that needs to be completely controlled. There is a lot of actually projects now, European Union, regulations, regulators are involved in how to regulate how the autonomous cars will be moving. But let's say the name of the game will be the massive mobility. Now, if you want to have a massive mobility with an immersive experience, and you need to reach to the accuracy of centimeter on the location, and you want to be on the volume of terabits per second on the kilometer square. And you still don't want to have your car as heavy as a truck carrying a data center in it, doing the computing inside. So you will need now to put the edge, the computing edge somewhere, and you want to have a 0.1 millisecond. You're able to integrate with this car. The maximum capability of 5G on the best case scenario in lab with a standalone, you will not reach the 1 millisecond. So there is a 10 times requirements there. So going into massive mobility, I think that's the driver. The more the mobility starting to move on in the industry of being autonomous and letting robots fly around us and drones being really the mainstream, the more that the 6G has to come, because then another aspect will come to the angle, which is terrestrial versus non-terrestrial communication. Because now I have a backup layer that I am moving my car. I need to make sure that my new ecosystem supports that I can fall back immediately from my handset into the satellite covering me. And then I move down there. So a lot of technological developments needs to happen. I don't see that happening even to see a standard in front of us before maybe 2028, 2029, then we go into trials around this. Different technologies needs to evolve with you, like terrestrial, non-terrestrial integration. For even a hologram diagram on a handset, it's 0.5 terabits per second requirement. So it's not feasible with what we're doing now. But will this happen and become a mainstream industry? That's the question. The massive mobility, that's the driver. So if these two move on, then 6G will be a little bit more fast track. If these two are not happening, then I don't think 6G is something on the horizon anyway.
I mean, this kind of thing must, you know, even in sort of sci-fi realms, that would require such massive computational power, surely, to make it feasible. I mean, in terms of the power constraints of, you know, I guess, I mean, we've had people from data centers obviously talking with us and stuff, and you know, what infrastructure-wise, I mean, what does that look like, and are we going to have to look at alternative power sources and this kind of thing, or what do we think?
It's going to be crowd, because at the end of the day, if you look at the evolution of the industry as well, we moved from the computing from the center, and now we're moving to the antenna. 6G, the computing will be on the handset or in the reflective wall, because like we need to be covering this location with maybe 2 or 3 stations, and the fading, and we're talking about the terahertz. So the computing and the power itself will move into our handsets, and that's where the sustainability question needs to be coming. And there is a lot of actually already research is being done here. Is your mobile or your speaker or your drone will be itself the station that actually helps to give the communication to the neighbor stations going there. But again, think about an augmented reality glass that actually has to have 5 to 10% of its computing inside here, and everything else happening. So it might be on your mobile, which is the existing use case of the location-based for Apple, for example, Things or Samsung Things. It's community, it's crowd connectivity happening. So the crowd power will also be happening. So my glasses, if they are virtual and AR, XR with an immersive reality, they will be using the power of Jessica next to me.
That's some power, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'll take that.
I don't know whether I'm sort of getting into the realms of ridiculousness here, but like, I mean, could the energy from our own bodies be used as fuel cells? You know, in some way, shape, or form.
There was trials already on the
kinetic. I guess we have like kinetic watches and things and stuff like that. So I don't know. I don't know whether we produce enough power. But have we got any questions from the floor at all for our panel? Yes, sir.
So we know that sort of 5G, by nature of higher frequencies, you know, we can transmit more data, lower frequency, higher bandwidth, etc. So we can see that 5G can power, you know, processing at the edge more efficiently, or really wide, kind of like distributed like applications. So my question is, does the panel kind of see any really unique, compared to 4G and Wi-Fi, sort of like security challenges with 5G in particular, or indeed as well, let's not be all doom and gloom, some big benefits of 5G potentially for security as well?
You can go for it.
I was going to say, our security expert here.
He was doing security.
So just if you think about, I'm going to take you back, right, in terms of like where the G's came from, you know, to take us to kind of where we are now. So if you think about, and this is at a very broad level, 2G was about voice, all right? 3G was about data, 4G was about video, and 5G is about things, right? So in other words, connectivity of things, you know? So is there a security element of that? Yes, because of course now the number of connections, you're going to be in the millions or tens of millions versus, you know, whatever it was before, or some multiple of that, right? So that's the kind of base level. Now, 5G as a standard, right, 3GPP standard, has a lot of security elements built into it. in terms of like the connectivity, just even my phone connecting to the base station is a very secure environment, right? Applications, of course, that then sit on top of that will be secure. So I think there's definitely, there's the potential for it. And by the way, it's a lot more secure than Wi-Fi, okay? That's maybe for another subject. There's a potential for it, but it's embedded into the standards, right? In terms of what opportunity it gives, that to be honest is more from the verticals that it supports versus security as an actual element itself. If that makes any sense, all right?
But in addition to that, it's moving the security concept, because like most of the use cases currently of the 5G is actually competing with Wi-Fi, as Paul rightfully said. So, and when you are thinking about your Wi-Fi network in the place where we are here, it's actually controlled from an existing data center here with highly skilled people that are actually controlling and putting the security on it. But if we move into the 5G, the security of that network around us, which is giving you more benefits than the Wi-Fi, will be actually centralized management. And the security of that node is centralized from a cyber defense center that, yes, despite the high skill of the people managing here, they are higher skills controlling that, and you are in more controlled environment when it comes to the security of the connection compared to having it within your own Wi-Fi locality, if that makes sense.
I think cellular technology by design is more secure, isn't it? Because it's you have to have a SIM card, so you have to identify exactly who you are, and then it's connection orientated. So inherently, it's tends to be more secure. But what I think you'll also see is the emergence of private networks as well. So particularly in manufacturing, where people will be very concerned about also the latency and reliability and security, not wanting very, very secure data going off premises. They will put their own computing power and have their own private network on-prem.
Anyone else from the floor at all? No, I just wondered, we had a talk earlier in regards to Wi-Fi 6 and how it sort of reduces latency and the quality of the experience, improving that. Just from your perspective, from the 5G perspective, and how these two things work, can any of you sort of elaborate on this a little bit? Because I think it's something that probably is not maybe clear to everyone in terms of how those things converge, so to speak.
It's last mile. So, like we talked about use cases for the enterprise or for an industry, and let's say if this is an industrial campus, you can completely use your IoT here over your Wi-Fi network, which in this case will be Wi-Fi 6. You still need to take it somewhere, right? This data has to go. So you either have a fiber connectivity that you're connecting to it and moving back with it, or you have a backhauling over a 5G connectivity that actually takes you there. That's one choice of your architecture. The other choice of your architecture, that you skip the Wi-Fi, local connectivity, and you have your private network of 5G, and you still need to backhaul through fiber network or another connectivity. It's always the more you go mobile, really, the more you go fix it. You need the indefinite resource that carries this data that Paul was mentioning. So now if Wi-Fi cannot replace 5G, but 5G can replace Wi-Fi, if that answers the question that you are after.
Interesting. Well answered. Anything to add before we wrap up at all, guys? No? Thank you very much. Sorry for running over, but it was worth it to end on a high. So thank you very much. And
Thanks.
if you could all give them a hand, please.